Thank you very much for being here. So Ethan, Erica, and I are honored to be announcing the winner of the 2017 ISTF Innovation Prize. The ISTF Innovation Prize will be awarded to an outstanding multidisciplinary project that has demonstrated creativity in building diverse and strategic partnerships in their communities for sustainable resource use. So this year we have 2 finalists for the prize, and they are the Human and Environment Development Organization from Sri Lanka, as well as the Prelang Community Network from Cambodia. We would first like to thank our finalists for traveling from far away, very long flights. I'm from Singapore, so I appreciate that, to be with us at this conference. We'd like to thank Dr. Kirti Mohoti, Mr. Pai Bunling, as well as Mr. Somchamuni for sharing the work that they did yesterday during the presentation and for really inspiring us with their stories. So I'd like to invite everyone to give them a round of applause. So we have really enjoyed getting to know our finalists in the brief time we've had together here, and I'm sure many of you have had meaningful conversations throughout the reception yesterday and the conference today. And right now we're going to call them to the stage so that we can begin with the prize ceremony. So first, we'd like to invite our conference chairs, Pooja Troxy and Michelle Mendelwitz, to proceed. And now we'd like to invite our 2 organizations to also join us on stage. So thanks to your participation yesterday with the audience voting, we have now selected the final winner. And the first prize for the Innovation Prize will be awarded a prize in the amount of $3,000. We have an exciting announcement to make. The second prize winner today will also be returning with $1,000 to support their work in their home country. So, we are really excited, and we'd like to now announce the 2017 ISTF Innovation Prize winner, and that is It's Our Forest Too by the Prelang Community Network. And in second place, the Human Environment and Development Organization. So once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Kirti Mohoti, Mr. Pai Bunling, as well as Mr. Somchamuni for being here with us in New Haven. And let's all give them another round of applause. And now I'd like to invite Ms. Pooja Troxy to introduce our final closing speaker for today.
Hi, everyone. First of all, apologies for ushering you guys so horribly back into the room, but we'll keep this short. And so I'd like to introduce our closing speaker, who's joining us from really, really far, actually. She traveled all the way from Thailand to be here with us, and we're really grateful that she could make it. Let me introduce to you Ms. Aban Marka Kabraji, who is the Regional Director for IUCN Asia, overseeing an active presence in 15 countries. With more than 30 years of experience, her leadership has been instrumental in bringing awareness to gender, culture, and the sovereign dimensions of conservation. She serves as the co-chair for the Mangroves for the Future, the chair for traffic, and a member of the Advisory Committee of the United Nations Center for Regional Development. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Maka Kabraji on stage.
Thank you very much, Pooja. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and congratulations to the winners. Both countries have come from the region I represent, so it's very nice to see both of you win a prize for all the good work you're doing. It's been a really good 2 days. I've sat through all the sessions, couldn't attend both the parallel ones, but certainly those that I could attend. And once, from an impressive array of speakers. I was particularly interested in the perspectives from so many different organizations that ISTF has brought together. And I'm very pleased to be invited, and thank you very much to Pooja, Michelle, and the team that I've seen working so diligently and so efficiently for the last couple of days. In all the, what I've been asked to do is a keynote at the end of it. So I'm going to break this up into 2 bits. The first, I'm going to talk a little bit about IUCN, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the main key impressions I got from the last couple of days and reflect those back to you. And I think overwhelmingly the thing that really knits the two together was the continuous emphasis that we heard in terms of the importance of creating partnerships, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary. Everyone was talking about partnerships. And nobody would dispute that, particularly in the context of ecosystems, because in a sense, ecosystems represent the web of life, and if anything represents partnerships between different life forms, that does. So it's a good basis on which to discuss the importance of what we have been speaking about, forestry ecosystems, and the complexity of the kinds of challenges we're facing institutionally and otherwise, and particularly with what we've been seeing in the last week in America. In a sense, these partnership principles are very much what has brought IUCN about, and historically, if you go back, IUCN was founded in 1948, just after the Second World War, and it responded to the kind of challenges that the world was facing then. Challenges of security, challenges of a new beginning, new growth. And it brought together, in response to the sorts of things that the scientists at that time in the world recognized as the major problems of development post-World War, with the kind of industrial changes that were likely to be coming about, and their impact on the natural environment, how important it was to have science advise governments in terms of what they did, and how they planned the future of their countries, and how they dealt with their natural resources. That's what brought IUCN together. And the founding fathers, a group of scientists like Sir Julian Huxley, recognized even then the most important thing was to try and ensure that you brought together the different sectors of society that made the decisions that influenced eventually the future of the planet. And that was governments, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector. And IUCN, set up so long ago, recognized even then the value and the importance of partnership. So unlike the other Bretton Woods institutions that were developed at that time, which were entirely part of the multilateral system and were intergovernmental, IUCN recognized the very important aspect that civil society played even then. And that's the big difference in terms of what makes IUCN so unique. It's a membership union. The Yale School of Forestry, through its Tropical Resource Institute, is a member of IUCN, by example. A number of the other people who spoke in the last couple of days from the institutions that represent the environmental world and the environmental community all over the world are members of IUCN. And this brings together a really unique organization with currently 1,300 member institutions, which represent the US government, for example, through the State Department, government agencies, the US EPA, NGOs, and 15,000 volunteer scientists in 6 commissions, and a number of other bodies that, the UN agencies, etc., the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, all of whom come together to influence the work of the Union, which essentially is to look at how best do we manage the planet. These particular bodies that come together essentially have, over the last few years, in fact, after the last few decades, been instrumental in designing most of the world's environmental conventions, this Convention on Biological Diversity, the setting up of UNEP, which in turn led to the UNFCCC, which in turn led to all the climate change conventions. All this has been done by the various bodies that came together in partnership to create what today is the architecture of our environmental world and our environmental governance systems globally. In your conference that I heard the peace speakers talk about in the last couple of days, you talked about the importance of restoring and sustaining healthy forests and forest landscapes. And these ecosystems are very much the bedrock of human well-being and prosperous societies. And in the current context of the global architecture, it's all being situated under the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Particularly from IUCN's perspective, SDG 14 and 15, which are terrestrial and water, but also there are the linkages, as you well know, with everything, poverty, gender, desertification, etc. And then with that, the Paris Agreement, the Aichi biodiversity targets, and all the other international commitments that one signs up to. Now, a little more in terms of the actual work that IUCN does within the SDGs, and specifically on forests. We move on, and we heard today a number of speakers talked about the bond challenge, they talked about landscapes, and they talked about how IUCN had developed the landscape concept, and then they talked also about restoration ecology. And that's very much where IUCN is today in terms of the whole idea of what's the next frontier. It's the, addressing the issues of degradation, land degradation, which is so severe in so many parts of the world, and therefore restoration ecology. So if you look at what we're looking at today as the main paradigm in terms of our work on forestry, it is forest landscape restoration. And the slide in front of you talks about the kinds of discussion that is taking place in terms of a multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral approach to forest conservation work, landscapes again, and restoration of different kinds of landscapes within a particular ecosystem. It's an integrated approach. And as you can see, the sort of areas that you look, what we call the reef-to-ridge approach in terms of where you look at different parts of a landscape and what you do in it. So these are really, for most of you foresters, this is not new. I'm just illustrating the kind of approach that IUCN is currently leading on. And then there is a methodology that is being spoken about and which I've left a few books for those of you who want to look, called ROAM, which is a particular methodology, a particular instrument that is now being used in terms of forest landscape restoration. It was put together with the World Resources Institute, and again, there are links and there are documents available for those who are interested. It's a toolkit that provides a framework for countries to rapidly identify and analyze areas that are primed for forest landscape restoration and to identify specific priority areas for restoration at a national or a subnational level. It's currently being applied in 34 countries, so it's already quite well integrated in forest management systems. We've also been a member of the Global Partnership for Forest Landscape Restoration, and I think some of you talked about being members of the global partnerships. And we've been supporting the Bond Challenge, which of course is now one of our fairly leading flagship with various governments programs, where we've got currently practically 136 million hectares are committed to being restored by 39 governments and land managers. And as you can see, the numbers are going up all the time. So it's been quite an impressive result. And it's not without political controversy. For example, China resists joining the Bern Challenge because they don't want to say that we're making a commitment publicly, globally. We'll do it, and we've done a lot more than what you're asking for, but we don't necessarily want to make a public commitment that that's what we're going to stick to. Other countries, Germany, of course, leads on that. And right now we're looking at a major commitment in Indonesia, where we're hoping that we'll be able to have an event in a couple of months in Sumatra, where Indonesia is going to make a fairly major commitment to the Bern Challenge. So that, again, is something that I think from a forestry perspective is a very interesting development, and hopefully will be, there'll be an announcement which would take us to about 150 million hectares or more of global restoration work, which is, I think, good news in terms of some of the stuff we've been hearing recently. IUCN also believes that a successful approach, again, taking partnership as the keystone of our work, is to take best practice and apply it to a whole range of other initiatives. And in Asia, one of the biggest flagship programs that we've been dealing with, and it's come up in conversations earlier, is something called Mangroves for the Future, which, as you can see, currently works along the entire coastline of Asia. We use the mangrove tree as a symbol, but it's really about coastal ecosystems. Mangroves, coastal forests, coral reefs, seagrass beds, and all the other aspects that make up tidal, intertidal, coastal ecosystems along this. And it's about resilience, it's about carbon capture, it's about addressing the issues of sea level rise, it's about restoration, ecology. And it is run largely by the governments of those countries. And it's again an example of a program where if you put government together with civil society and the private sector, you actually can get some extremely good results. It started as a post-tsunami emergency response program more than 10 years ago. It continues now very much as a climate change resilience program with human beings and livelihood aspects right at its center. Its most important part, and this goes back to the partnership issue, is its governance structure, where you actually have 12 governments working together in terms of coastal management, national and interregional, transregional, and you have working alongside with them UN agencies, you have the private sector, and you have NGOs. It's a very interesting example of the kind of governance mechanisms that you can actually achieve if you work through a lot of issues in terms of how you actually agree to share resources and share responsibility for natural resource management. At the heart of this particular program is also a fairly interesting mechanism, which is grants. The program actually takes the money in a basket from the donors and then hands it out. And over the last 10 years or so, we've handed out more than $6 million in this program to communities, to government agencies, and to even UN organizations who are doing really important work in terms of restoration and coastal management. I'll stop there in terms of the IUCN bit of the presentation and just go on a little bit on partnerships. We've talked about the importance of multidisciplinary approaches, and yes, they do bring huge benefits, but they can be challenging. And one of the things I didn't hear too much about earlier when we had the session on partnerships was how difficult they can sometimes be. They can be a lot more time-consuming and expensive than conventional approaches. They run against the grain of the usual way of trying to work in silos, and most people are much more comfortable doing that. And they often require skills that we're not taught, particularly if you work with government agencies. And finally, partnerships are about power. They're about sharing power. They're about negotiating power. They're about whether you trust the people you're working with to give up some of your power. And that, I think, is possibly the most political part of partnerships, which I think is often underestimated in terms of a lot of the work that we try and do. Forests, for example, are diverse ecosystems, and restoration ecology is talked about, and we heard things about private sector getting involved. And for example, there's a watershed in China where we work with Danone Water. And the reason Danone is interested is because economically that's where their bottled water comes from. So clearly they're very, very keen to make sure that that watershed is kept in good condition and forested, and you don't get pesticide residue going into their groundwater, which they bottle and sell. And you can get that kind of relationship between private sector and ecosystems, and it works positively. But at the same time, there are power shifts there. There are communities, there are land rights, there are tenure issues, as you all know. And when you talk about the partnerships, again, it's a question of negotiating. Who has the power, who gives it up, who shares it, and how exactly are we going to take it forward? I think the point is that it is the only way forward, as we know. We've heard in the last couple of days about the importance of water, the importance of people, the importance of health, the importance of certification, and all this is underpinned by the ability to develop and to maintain good working relationships with people, and, as somebody said, to establish the basis of trust that makes those relationships work. And if we want to maintain inclusive development and hold out against the tide of what we now see around the world, parochial, insular populism, which threatens much of what we've achieved over the last 30 years, I think one of the things that will hold out against it is the ability to maintain these partnerships, to maintain this discussion on power, and to ensure that the power stays with the people who can stand together and can continue to put the interests of our planet above narrow national interests. So I suppose I would end by saying that conferences like this are important. The work that FES does is extremely important. I suspect the next 4 years are going to be extremely difficult, particularly in this country. And for those of us who don't live here, what you do affects all of us. It's a ripple effect around the world. There is another superpower that is going to step in, I think, more and more into the breach. And we work very closely with that, China, particularly in my region. And I look at the quotes that you've got on your tables outside from Aldo Leopold, and I think, gosh, all he worried about at that point was styrofoam. I wish our world was as simple as his world was at that time. But here in FES, and with conferences like yours and with people like yours, like you, I think there's a lot of hope that one will be able to hold back the tide and, continue to do the good work, fight the good fight. And, there's a story that we hear in Laos, and probably it has many iterations in other cultures as well, that when they want to build the dam and the community sits around and decides whether the dam should be built or not, one person speaks for the river, because there has to be somebody who speaks in defense of the river. And so be the river, because I think you guys in FES can do that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gordon Jabal. I'm one of the associate deans, and I'm part of the closing ceremonies. I invited myself up here, and Michelle Mputa gladly allowed me to, so thank you. So I'm the thank you committee, but I want to start with the word connected, which was up here. This conference, this get-together, has been an example of connection, and I'm just so amazed. First of all, I'd like to honor and congratulate the winners. But remember, they were two of how many winners? How many people applied? 25. Oh, yes, Ethan's in charge right here. 25. So that gives us hope. We got to hear your two presentations, and we got to know better what's going on at the ground level in your countries. And That connects us to not only the 25, but again, I'd like to thank all the presenters that came here, the stories that you told, and the information, the ideas you shared, and the willingness to take your time to come here. That's part of us all being connected here together. And I want to also thank my good friend Aban for coming from Bangkok and sharing the connected work that IUCN does and giving us some remarks. But I especially want to thank Pooja and Michelle. Do you want to come up here? You get to go next, so this is your transition time. So we wouldn't have all been connected if it hadn't been for these two people. And actually, these two people now represent a whole group of people going back 22 some years of students who have now graduated from here, the leadership of the ISTF. And so I want, through you two, I want to thank all of the people who've brought so many generations, 22 years of people from around the world together to connect. So I hope that you will take inspiration from yourselves, I hope you all take ideas back with your countries, to your countries and to your friends and colleagues back there. And I hope that you remind them that it's these two and their team that brought us together. So I want you all to thank ISTF through these two for all their work.
Gordon, thank you so much, as always, for everything you do. So before we leave, firstly, we wanted to thank our very generous sponsors that allowed us to do this conference in the first place. So first is the Coleman Fund of the New York Botanical Gardens, the Council on Southeast Asia Studies at Yale University, the Development Fund at Yale FES, the Students' Affairs Committee at Yale FES, the Yale Council on African Studies, and the Yale Council on Latin American and Iberian Studies. Secondly, and finally, we would love to thank our planning committee, without whom this would be impossible, and that has worked so hard over the past 6 months to put this together. So when I call your names, please stand up, and if we can give them a round of applause. So first, our treasurer, Veronica. She has worked tirelessly to raise funds to keep with the tradition of encouraging grassroots organizations from different countries to come to Yale and present their work. And as Gordon said, this year we had over 20 countries, so this is really, really awesome. The talks you have heard at the conference were possible due to the efforts of Laura, Eric, Guyan, Bowen, Leonora, Kata, Wei Young, and Asha.
Everything from the food to tech, travel, accommodation, all the tiny logistics that ran very smoothly. We have 3 people to thank for that. So please stand up. Liz, Julia, and Nadine. Despite all the hurdles that our Innovation Prize team and finalists had to face, we succeeded in bringing 2 amazing prize finalists to Yale. And we can't thank you enough. Sabrina, Erica, and Ethan. For helping us with all our communication, we would very much like to thank our friend Farouk, who's not here today. Unfortunately, he had another engagement. But Farouk helped us a lot with communication. So a round of applause anyway. We also had many volunteers and fellow ISTFers who lent a hand and rose to every occasion to help. So please stand up when your name is called. Chris. Ruth, Metzel. I believe Ruth's left. Varuni, Corey, Santiago, Tyler, And our friends at the NC State ISTF chapter, Matthew and Jose, if you're here. Lastly, we thank our professors and all our colleagues for so much support and guidance. And we hope you had a really wonderful 2 days over here. And we hope you have a great evening and that we see all of you next year for ISTF 2018.